We begin with the House Oversight Committee and this image. And our point here is not to get mired in what might be the salacious aspects of this, but rather to leave this up for you to remember. If nothing else, Donald Trump and his allies repeatedly publicly denied that what you see with your own eyes here exists. This was from the Epstein estate. It is allegedly from and signed by Donald Trump, dating back to 2003. The body content, the word many have used about it, the obvious representation of a woman here, the references to youth, young women, or even underage women are all contained here. Now, I should note this is as released from the Epstein estate to Congress. The White House has previously and continues to deny that this is legitimate, that Donald Trump drew that, signed it, and sent it over to Epstein. So there you have the updated statement. Trump did not draw the picture, and he did not sign it. But this is under subpoena. Epstein is dead. The documents under control of the estate are overseen now by lawyers and other independent officials. So there's every incentive for them to basically comply with the subpoena, and almost no reason or conspiracy theory that could explain why they would risk, for example, breaking the law to concoct evidence to predate and bother Donald Trump. And remember, it's not just this evidence alone, although this is a big deal because it's the first time tonight we've ever had the underlying image of the material. But it dates back to reporting done by Fox News' sister outlet, the Murdoch-owned Wall Street Journal, which reported about this back in July, which drew a very strong rebuttal reaction and denial from Trump and his allies.
I don't do drawings. I'm not a drawing person. I don't do drawings. I'm not a drawing person. I don't do drawings of women, that I can tell you. They say there's a drawing of a woman, and I don't do drawings of women.
President Trump has filed what he calls a powerhouse lawsuit over the Wall Street Journal's Jeffrey Epstein report.
Well, that includes alleged details of a bawdy birthday note sent to disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein.
I was a very successful business guy. He was a very controversial. Who would do a controversial drawing?
Who would do a controversial drawing? The denials, the speculation, the lawsuit, all of that in July when, as you might recall, this was a very hot issue. And maybe they just wanted to buy time, try to get out of the news cycle, try to intimidate or scare people with lawsuits. And we've seen some media companies settle lawsuits regardless of the facts just to get out from under the pressure from the Trump White House. What's different today, and I want to put it back up on the screen in a moment here, when you look at this element, this document, this birthday card, whatever you want to call it, that came from the Epstein estate, it is the evidence that undercuts everything claimed by Donald Trump. And while I can't tell you what's going to happen in the lawsuit, when you look at this, this is bad news for Trump's lawsuit. I can tell you that today, based on public evidence as opposed to yesterday, it is far more likely that Trump will lose any effort to continue a lawsuit against the Journal when the evidence is right here and his claim is he didn't do it. But the Epstein estate, the chain of custody, has the very document. Epstein abuser's attorney is saying Trump's hypocrisy has been frustrating for the victims, and they say the president should apologize, presumably for many things, but also withdraw the lawsuit. You'll see at the end here from Mr. Edwards with today's release, referring to the image you just saw, the least Trump could do is, quote, withdraw that lawsuit. Top members of Congress want more transparency. And again, what we're learning from this subpoena, even if it seems obvious or like what people may have believed, the Journal obviously already did its fact-checking, had multiple sources, had its reasons for going forward. That's why journalism, reporting evidence, is different than just talking, especially talking done by politicians. But it is a sign that you're going to need to get the evidence and not just take the denials of the government's word on these things. Now, here's one of the Republicans who has been more straightforward about this, saying we need more disclosure. This was out during the weekend.
I think it's going to be embarrassing to some of the billionaires, some of the donors who are politically connected to his campaign. I also think Democrats are going to be implicated in this, Democrat donors. We can't avoid justice just to avoid embarrassments for some very powerful men.
That's really putting it straightforward. The actual injustices, evidence and information, and then the so-called embarrassment for the people who may feel tied to this. There are a ton of votes to get this done. Now, if you ever follow Congress, you probably know sometimes there's a lot of votes that are like people wanting to say that they're doing something while they don't get all the way there. They say they're now 2 votes shy of the needed majority to override the Republican leadership, which is where they were late last week, which raises the question of whether Republicans, most of whom are standing by the secrecy, have kind of cut a deal. And they have some people obviously breaking ranks, but they know or think they know they're not going to lose this vote outright. We will see. This discharge petition is the technical name. We've been following that. Then there's the other bombshell, and this is one with a lot of work that went into it because credit to the New York Times. We talk on the news sometimes about where information comes from. The Times, with a team of reporters and a ton of evidence, did an exhaustive investigative report that came out today. How one of the top banks in the country, J.P. Morgan, is, their word, enabling Epstein's crimes over the years. And this is a years-long review they did at the lucrative relationships that tied Epstein to this big bank, to specific bankers, and, this is important, to conflicts of interest, which meant that the usual policies that are supposed to at least kind of somewhat protect people if things get really obvious, if there's tens of thousands of dollars trading hands in cash or anti-money laundering flags being waved, at some point, even lucrative clients are supposed to get cut off. This report is important. I'm going to read to you from it because it shows how, in the Epstein case, that did not happen. Here's one section. At Epstein's behest, the bank sets up accounts into which he transferred huge sums for young women who turned out to be victims of his sex trafficking operations. So this bank, J.P. Morgan, which is tied, by the way, to both parties, a lot of important relationships, we can get into that. J.P. Morgan then wired his funds overseas, also paying him millions of dollars for what were described as his consulting and introduction services of the other powerful people, mostly men that he knew. Top bank executives, according to the report, did not deal with the clear warning signs about Epstein and the illegal behavior. And remember, that's not just an ethical issue of do you want to be in business with someone like that, a fair question. It's also a legal issue because there are anti-money laundering and know your customer laws on this. And if you find out enough bad things about the customer, separate from whatever ethics you have or don't have, you have your own legal obligation to the bank to deal with that or cut the customer off. Or you yourself and the bank could get in trouble. And this bank later paid out money, but not to a degree that affected all the money it made off this. Again, reading from the Times account, bank officials anxious about Epstein's prolific wire transfers and cash withdrawals. Morgan ultimately processed over $1 billion, they estimate. They, quote, warned senior management. And they tabulate at least 4 times over 5 years, quote, the bank's leaders overrode those objections, continuing to serve Epstein. At the center of the reporting is one J.P. Morgan banker, Jess Staley, seen here. Now, he was seen as a both associate and friend of Epstein, meaning, and this is the way apparently Epstein cultivated things, they both did business together, but also did other things. That includes sailing on a yacht to Epstein's notorious island. And according to the Times account, he was Epstein's chief defender who admitted to having sex with an associate of Epstein. That individual, this woman, who is anonymous under the reporting here, would later allege in a lawsuit, eventually settled that Epstein sexually abused her for more than a dozen years, forcing her and others to engage in commercial sex with certain select friends. What the Times is doing there is piecing together the problem. This is the kind of article that is carefully written, obviously, carefully reported, and very lawyered. So that link there is not alleging, for example, an underage crime with this individual or basically saying that they have their own legal exposure, but it's showing a breakdown that goes to all of the elite support that Epstein got. And there were, according to the Times, multiple instances where Staley shut down the efforts to hold Epstein accountable. And the bank is not the government. They don't have to prove that he's a criminal. They just have to reach the obvious conclusion, according to this reporting, that there was too much exposure, too much illicit cash and other activities, and that this was not someone they should be banking with. The Times reports that the banker I mentioned during Epstein's jail sentence, Morgan continued wiring money from his accounts to banks in Russia and Eastern Europe, where young women were being drawn into his sex trafficking network, and that's according to sealed court records. Sealed means there was some arrangement under the government, and it could be foreign or domestic, to not distribute this. Here we are years later with a lot having gone down, and this report, credit to the Times, has effectively gotten some of the key information out of what were sealed records. Indeed, it wasn't until Epstein was arrested in 2019 that JP Morgan then, again, under what I mentioned to you, their own legal liability, flagged all these suspicious transactions to the feds, but it was all in the past, retroactive. The bank also sued that executive. That case settled confidentially. But according to the Times account on the key instances here, we never saw those executives fired. And it was also reported within the article that the key leader of the bank across those years, Jamie Dimon, was not informed, was not in the loop about what had been a swelling set of questions about what was a clearly prominent client. Dimon is in that top job to this day. This is the stuff that comes out slowly over time. When we look at the financial pressure, at the political alliances, at the birthday card level relationship between President Trump and the now deceased sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, there's a lot of reasons why this stuff doesn't come out. And yet in a time where people say maybe nothing matters anymore, or is this all just politics, quote unquote, there is something important happening along the way with real lawyers for real victims who we saw speak out recently, with an investigative piece like this, which we can tell you is months in the making. This didn't get uncorked last week, with a lot of other people who still are involved in truth-seeking, even in this cynical age, to get what Donald Trump and his cabinet have clearly denied, which is justice and transparency for the victims.